Hi Anna, nice to chat again off the back of UK FinTech Week. So I think both you and I were at various events over the week, lots going on. So it's really great to sit down and chat and kind of get a few insights out, and hopefully it'll be quite practical and useful or interesting to our audiences or people that couldn't be there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was nice to kind of bump into you at a couple of events last week, and certainly needed the kind of weekend to digest and kind of do a lot of follow-up after all of the kind of face-to-face meetings and events last week.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about doing events like that is you get to hear so many different perspectives. You get to meet so many different people from different angles and approaching compliance in different ways. And I think what we were blessed with is lots of attendees from MAS, the Singaporean regulator, and also attendees from their fintech sector. Because obviously the FCA's got quite a close collaboration now with MAS, which I found quite interesting. And I think there was a lot of themes or discussion points around how regulators can kind of work together around different themes, obviously AI being a big one, but also, yeah, just kind of refreshing to see so much collaboration in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess both the FCA and MAS really innovative regulators. I think that the MAS have published the kind of first AI principles AI paper back in 2018, and certainly they have been kind of leading the space.
Yeah, and I think cool also, I mean, on the Friday you were there as well to see some of the innovation happening within both kind of the UK fintech space and also the Singaporean fintech space. And I guess quite heartwarming for me and probably
Mhm.
for you being in the compliance space, that it definitely feels like the early stage fintechs are kind of designing their innovations with kind of risk and compliance at the core. And I think, I guess, in terms of the implications, that there might be a bit of an operating model advantage in a way because they're able to kind of integrate it at the core, both technologically and what that means from the data governance and just the governance profile of the technology, but also just how they approach compliance and risk. And I thought that was quite a nice theme that I kind of gathered
Mhm.
from that week.
Yeah, certainly. I guess firms that are kind of applying for their licenses, applications, and are setting up their operations have that advantage, and they can build on a lot of the kind of some of the innovative, also RegTech infrastructure that definitely streamlines that regulatory interpretation, the permission space, mapping that back to policies and controls. So definitely, I also noticed this theme around kind of building compliance into the operations, almost kind of from an engineering perspective, from a
Yeah.
purely data perspective. Certainly, in my experience, that is kind of fantastic from a design perspective. But obviously, compliance is not just about kind of data and AI. It's also about execution. It's about a human judgment. It's about those kind of gray areas that can't be automated. So certainly, I think that we'll still kind of see a lot of that tension in the space, regardless of AI. But for sure, automation takes some of those kind of inefficiencies away. And certainly also firms that are kind of starting from scratch now have the advantage of not having those kind of legacy systems and kind of, a history of M&As that are quite common at enterprise level, which make this, I guess, compliances, infrastructure and compliances, kind of the architecture of a firm, much harder to centralize and control.
Yeah, must be nice to be an incumbent firm that kind of that can just start at the position that we're in right now. And I guess one of the other things for me in that reg tech space is like, wow, how much we've progressed as well in terms of the sorts of features that are available in the market now. It's like, as a budding young compliance person
Mhm.
about, over 10 years ago, where you had to kind of print the FCA handbook and go through it with highlighter pens, like the world's really, really moved on. And that's really cool for me to see, but also, I guess, brings about um, some additional risks in terms of the compliance monitoring framework and kind of, having to rethink a little bit about how we look at operational resilience frameworks and how we look at our outsourced providers and, how we potentially look at all the features that we're actually bringing on board within either compliance frameworks or more broadly into the financial services ecosystem. But yeah, very fun to see those demos. It was quite a
Mhm.
nice kind of interlude to what's otherwise kind of conference heavy in some ways for the rest of the week.
Mhm.
So I suppose, what are some of the other things that you found interesting or exciting about the week?
Yeah, so I attended several events, I guess, since you were talking about Friday. So the kind of FCA MAS Global AI Governance and Innovation Forum. I think there's some of the themes that we can also draw from that is that most of the kind of firms' participation as part of this kind of innovation pathways with the regulators are still from the kind of retail space, not so much from the wholesale space. And I think that the FCA have been kind of pretty vocal about that also in their wholesale priorities paper that I believe was issued last month. Um, and I think that they're kind of calling for also more wholesale firms to apply for those tracks because they're certainly kind of great to kind of test and experiment new data models, new ideas, using AI, using the kind of various supercharged sandbox environments provided by the FCA. And also, I think that they're kind of great fora for participants to kind of also learn from each other, network, and also kind of build that rapport with the regulators' innovation themes. I certainly have probably most of my experience is actually in the wholesale space. So I'm
Yeah, me
definitely
too.
kind of trying to, to have some of those conversations in my kind of community, in my network, to kind of go and, test some of the innovation that is happening in the whole space as well, more openly with the regulators.
Yeah, and it's quite a new conversation, I suppose, for me to hear because I think again over the past kind of 10 years or so, the regulators really moved on into being more growth and innovation positive.
Mhm.
And I think that's pretty cool because I think the messaging certainly that I got is, stick to the principles. People understand that core messaging about principles, but regardless of, adding new regulation or deregulation, at the end of the day, there is those core sets of principles that people should abide by, or financial services businesses. And I think there's a bit of a cultural shift now, and especially in that in the innovation pathways that you're referring to. The AI lab, some of the more scale up innovation labs, etc. There's a bit of a cultural shift about away from kind of fear of being wrong to actually experimenting in a safe environment and learning from each other. And actually engaging in that regulatory dialogue. Because I think the FCA mentioned a couple of times that, we are open to conversations from
Mhm.
firms proactively reaching out and saying, this is where we're at and actually how can we engage early. And I think in a space where we're at the moment with this AI kind of integration mode, that's got to be a priority for firms, is actually to think about what potential outcomes can happen. Yes, of course, you've got to add your commercial edge. You might want to be progressive and growth oriented and innovative. And the FCA are very uh, positive around that, but they're also saying, come to us and we can kind of support you on that pathway. And I think that was quite a fun conversation or a fun theme that I found throughout the week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the FCA in particular have been very open around exactly that to kind of attract firms to apply for several of the innovation pathways, and not just for regulated firms, but also for some of the firms that operate in the RegTech space. So, for example, I think one of the latest tracks that was open, I believe, last week or so, is around AML testing and kind of AI around that. I think that also, apart from the innovation space and all of the kind of sandboxes, the labs, the FCA have been doing a lot of work around their kind of licensing journeys. And I think that some of the stats that were quoted early in the week, I believe actually at the kind of launch of the UK FinTech Week, that event on Monday that we both
Yeah, yeah,
attended.
yeah, I remember. Yeah.
I think that they refer to more than 270 past meetings hosted last year, more than 250 minded to approve letters. So these are all, I guess, kind of real data points showing that the FCA are very busy with the kind of community of firms that are applying for new licenses, that are going through those authorization journeys. And certainly the FCA have cleared kind of a lot of the backlog that I think that a number of us have experienced in the space, which is great.
Yeah, and I guess, you work with very innovative firms and fintech businesses on their licensing, and you also work in the crypto space too. So hopefully there's also kind of a bit of a benefit to all those types of firms when it comes to their licensing and ability to get a license, but also to engage early, because I think one of the things that the FCA also mentioned is they are conscious that sometimes funding for these businesses actually relies on the fact that they will get regulated in the future. So I think in all a really really busy, interesting week, like loads of cool, innovative demos and stuff like that. So I really found it interesting. But I guess for me, main takeaways for firms: keep doing what you're doing around the principles, and outcomes.
Mhm.
Make sure you have operational resilience in mind, but also continue to be open with the regulator. They're super keen to hear from the business side and from the firms that they regulate and new firms coming into the market. So, what are your kind of three main takeaways?
Absolutely. So I don't know if I can come up with such a neat list, but definitely, I guess when it comes to AI, the regulator is very clear that they're not kind of intending, at least in the short to medium term, to kind of come up with new prescriptive
Hmm.
rules overseeing AI, and it's down to the firms to as we say, kind of stick to the existing principle-based outcomes and make sure that as AI kind of increasingly permeates those operations, the same outcomes are achieved. Certainly, in some of the kind of also corridor conversations that we've been having over the week, and kind of more broadly, I guess there is a kind of fine tension sometimes, especially perhaps at enterprise level. Some of the operators in the financial services space may appreciate actually more open rules, more prescriptive rules. But
Yeah,
certainly, I think that the fintech community, precisely because of what you kind of just said at the beginning, data governance and kind of achieving those principles are already very important. The culture is already there,
yeah.
and due to their size, it might be also easier to kind of deploy AI in a way that achieves those outcomes without imposing new compliance standards. On the broader landscape across the kind of fintech space, for sure, I guess the message has been very optimistic that UK is open for business. There has been about $15 billion invested in the UK fintech market last year. It's still a booming market. So yeah, I guess it's about recognizing all of the kind of good work that we're doing in this community, And yeah, just keep going.
And I also loved your thing that you said on your panel, and I think it was your panel was around AI governance. You said you can't drive a fast car without brakes. So I think I want to add that as a little final finisher too, from yours true as from Anna. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you. Great little roundup, and
absolutely.
more to come hopefully.
Thanks very much, Anastasia.
Thanks.